Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting sources today, a bit on the philosophy of Donald Davidson and also some molecular biology basics, DNA, RNA.
That's right.
And it struck us, looking at them, there might be this, well, surprising link.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're diving into.
Mm.
How Davidson's ideas, usually about mind and language, might actually give us a new angle on the building blocks of life itself.
Yeah, exactly. Because, when you first read Davidson, you're probably thinking language, meaning how we understand each other.
Right, human communication.
But the really interesting twist here is asking, can we use those same philosophical tools to understand how a cell reads its own genes, how it acts on that information?
Okay, let's unpack this. So Davidson's famous idea, meaning is use. He argued, basically, that understanding words isn't about some dictionary definition floating in space.
Mm-hmm.
It's about seeing how people actually use the words, in context. How could that possibly apply to DNA?
Well, think about DNA as a kind of language, like the biology sources laid out. You've got genes, codons, acting a bit like words.
Okay.
But just like the meaning of, say, the word bank changes if you're talking about money or a river,
Right.
the meaning of a gene, let's call that its expression, what protein it makes and when, isn't just set by its sequence alone. It really, really depends on the cellular environment, the context.
Okay. Well, like the example you mentioned, run. Running a business versus a river's run. Totally different meanings from the same word just based on the sentence.
Exactly.
So a gene, the same gene in a muscle cell, could act completely differently than in a brain cell because the surroundings, the signals are different.
Precisely. And that ties into another Davidson idea, radical interpretation.
Radical interpretation.
Yeah. His thought was, if you meet someone speaking a totally alien language, you don't have a dictionary. You have to watch them, see what they do, what's going on around them.
And infer the meaning from behavior and context.
You got it. So applying that to DNA, it suggests we can't fully grasp a gene's meaning just by reading the letters, the A, T, C, G sequence. We have to look at how that gene behaves inside the cell, how it interacts with everything else, what the output is.
So it's less like a static blueprint and more dynamic. Like its meaning is negotiated based on the cell situation.
That's a great way to put it. It's an interaction constantly being interpreted by the context, not just a simple instruction manual.
Okay. Now, languages have mistakes, typos, slip-ups. Biology has mutations, right? Errors in the DNA sequence. How does Davidson's thinking help us here?
Yeah, mutations. It's a good question. Think about talking to someone and they misspeak, use the wrong word slightly. You just throw your hands up.
No, you usually try to figure it out. You think, okay, what did they likely mean to say? Based on everything else they said, the situation, you try to be, well, charitable.
Exactly. That's Davidson's principle of charity. The basic idea is we assume people are trying to be rational, trying to make sense. We look for the interpretation that makes their words coherent in context.
And you're saying cells do something similar? With mutations?
It's surprisingly analogous. Cells have, proofreading and repair mechanisms. They try to fix errors. But even if a mutation slips through, the cell doesn't always just say, shut down that gene or self-destruct. Often, it tries to work with that slightly altered code. It tries to interpret that signal, make the best of it given its current needs.
So the cell is kind of applying the principle of charity. Okay, this isn't perfect, but let's see what we can make of it.
Sort of, yeah. It shows that interpretation, whether human or biological, is flexible. It aims for coherence even when things aren't perfect. It adapts.
Let's shift gears a bit to RNA. The biology primers talked about it as the messenger, carrying the DNA info. But through this Davidson lens, is it maybe more than just a messenger?
Absolutely. You could definitely argue RNA isn't just passively carrying the message, it's acting as an interpreter, too.
An interpreter. How so?
Well, think about Davidson's view of thoughts, not just isolated blips, but patterns interpreted against all our other beliefs and desires.
Okay.
So RNA takes the DNA sequence, right? But then in the ribosome, with all the other cellular machinery around, that context influences how it translates the sequence into an actual protein. It's an act of decoding.
It's not just copying, it's translating within a specific environment.
Exactly. And this gets even more interesting with alternative splicing.
Yes, where one gene can lead to different proteins.
Right. The cell can process the initial RNA transcript in different ways, snipping bits out, joining others, creating multiple different final mRNA molecules from one single gene.
So one gene sequence. multiple potential protein meanings, depending on how the RNA is interpreted and processed.
Precisely. It's like one word, say, in a poem versus a science textbook. Same letters, maybe, but the context and processing give it a very different flavor, a different meaning.
That's a fantastic parallel. Same genetic word, different cellular readings. Okay, now this one sounds deep. Anomalous monism. Davidson's idea. What was that again?
Right, anomalous monism. It's the idea that mental events, thoughts, feelings are physical events in the brain. That's the monism part. It's all physical stuff.
Okay.
And this is the anomalous part. There aren't strict, predictable laws that link a specific thought directly to a specific brain state in a one-to-one predictive way. The mental depends on the physical, but you can't perfectly reduce it or predict it with laws like you can in, say, physics.
Complex. So physical events, but no strict governing laws connecting mind and body perfectly. How could that possibly relate to gene expression, given all our cells have the same DNA?
Well, think about that very point. Every cell pretty much has the same DNA blueprint.
Right.
Yet a neuron is totally different from a liver cell. They do different things. Why? Because different genes are switched on or off. Gene expression.
And that switching, it's not simple, is it? It's not like flipping a single light switch for neuron function.
Not at all. Gene expression is incredibly complex. It's influenced by, well, tons of things. Signals from other cells, the cell's own history, nutrients, hormones, the environment. It's this huge network.
So it's dynamic, not deterministic. Not like if condition A, then gene X always turns on to level Y.
Exactly. There's a physical event happening, a gene is transcribed, a protein is made. That's real. It's physical. But whether it happens and how much isn't dictated by one simple rule. It emerges from this web of interactions. It echoes that anomalous monism idea. A physical basis, the DNA sequence is there, but the outcome, which proteins get made when, isn't governed by strict, simple predictive laws. It depends on the whole context.
Physical gene exists, but its expression is anomalous in a way, dependent on many factors, not reducible to a single law.
Wow. It's quite a striking parallel, isn't it? How his ideas about mind seem to map onto these fundamental biological processes, suggest some deep connections.
Okay, one last facet of Davidson. He talked about language not just being a code,
right,
but meaning really emerging from interaction between speakers.
Yes. A word alone doesn't mean much until it's used in context, in communication between people trying to understand each other.
And the parallel to DNA.
Well, the DNA sequence itself, the string of A's, TS, CS, you could see that as the code, the symbols.
Right.
But that code only gets its meaning, its biological significance, when it interacts with the rest of the cell.
So it needs the machinery, the RNA polymerase to read it, the ribosomes to translate it, all the regulatory proteins.
Exactly. It's the interaction with all that cellular machinery that makes the DNA do something, that gives the code its function. Without that interaction, it's just inert information.
Like a word just sitting on a page, unused. It needs the reader, the context, the conversation.
Precisely. It highlights that meaning, whether in language or biology, isn't just inherent in the symbols. It emerges from the dynamic interplay, the system working together. Its interpretation, layered and complex, just as Davidson argued for thought and language.
So wrapping this up, looking at Davidson through this biological lens, using these sources, it really suggests life down at the molecular level isn't just chemistry. It's almost like an interpretive process.
An ongoing conversation, you could say, where meaning arises from context, from interaction, from use.
Yeah. And that's really the big takeaway, isn't it? Davidson's ideas, surprisingly, give us tools to think about not just ourselves and how we communicate, but maybe about life itself.
It's a powerful perspective, for sure. Opens up new ways of thinking about these incredibly complex systems.
So something to mull over. If life is interpretation at this fundamental level, what does that mean for inheritance, for how traits pass down? Could something like genetic memory, could that be framed as a kind of inherited, deeply embedded interpretation? That's a real Davidson-style puzzle to ponder.
Definitely food for thought.
Until our next deep dive.